What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back for what I hope will be the first in a series of videos chronicling my experiences running a 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Just to give you a little background on my level of gaming experience, I grew up playing 1st and 2nd edition back in the 80s and 90s. First as a player with my older brother, and then around age 12 or so up through my 20s, I became the Dungeon Master for my friends in middle school, high school, college, and beyond. And then eventually my baby bro is my final player in the early 2000s. And at that point I retired from tabletop RPGs in favor of games like World of Warcraft, which I played for years, and eventually the Dark Souls franchise, which has very successfully scratched my gaming itch for the last 5 years or so. But every once in a while, I would dip a toe back into D&D with computer games like Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 or Neverwinter Nights. And recently, I suddenly found myself wanting to give tabletop gaming another try. First and foremost, D&D has been exploding in popularity lately. 2020 was its biggest year ever in terms of sales, probably because of the pandemic. But there's this giant feature film in the works, as well as a lot of video games like Dark Alliance coming in June, and Baldur's Gate 3, which is still in early access mode, but I've been absolutely loving it. The trailers alone were enough for me to get fired up to take another crack at D&D, and as if all these various factors were not already enough, I recently discovered all these fantastic videos on YouTube where actor Joe Manganiello was talking about how he got back into the game after like a 20-year absence, and how he's been hosting these Friday night games with celebrities like Vince Vaughn, and it just looked like so much damn fun. But finally, the straw that broke the camel's back were my conversations with Victor Rodriguez on a couple episodes of my podcast Wrong Reel, where he would talk about some of the RPGs he was involved with. So long story short, right after New Year's, I picked up the starter set for 5th edition and started learning this new system, one which feels 100% true to the D&D that I remembered from the 80s and 90s, but it features all kinds of really interesting innovations in comparison to 1st and 2nd edition. Also, if you look closely, you can see some of my old school books from 1st and 2nd edition still proudly displayed on my bookshelf down there. I guess if maybe if I lift up the computer, can I give y'all a better view? Anyway, I'm just going to cut to a close-up because I'm going to end up breaking my whole system. In any event, the next step involved finding a group that would not only be interested in playing, but also joining me in creating some content, basically podcasts about the game itself. And luckily, I have a lot of friends in the podcasting world. And my thinking was, and still is, that if I recruited people who naturally are really into movies and filmmaking and storytelling, that the choices they would make in-game would make our sessions all the more cinematic. The final long-term goal is to make some kind of feature-length video for my channel about our experiences, but for now, we're just going to focus on what went down when I decided to run a party through the Sunless Citadel, a module that was originally created for 3rd edition D&D, but which has been updated to 5th edition in this incredible collection called Tales from the Yawning Portal. In this book, I'm just absolutely in love with it. Like every gamer who played 1st edition, I'm almost crippled with nostalgia for the early days of D&D. When I first got started, my brother had this incredible collection of late 70s and early 80s 1st edition books and modules, and the art of that period by people like Errol Otis. I don't know if D&D could ever possibly be cooler than that period, but what's great about Tales from the Yawning Portal is how it includes several classic modules from 1st edition that have now been updated to the latest rules, so I'm absolutely chomping at the bit to run my players through all these classic modules once they're high enough level. Because my goal for this campaign is basically to have my players experience each and every single adventure in this book, which should allow them to reach a very high level, assuming that they survive all the horrors that are in store for them. As far as the module, the Sunless Citadel goes, not to worry. If you're a player who wants to run it, I won't mention any spoilers until I give you a very clear and fair warning. But let's get the technical details out of the way first. My players are scattered all over North America, so we've been using the Roll20 app for maps and rolling dice and all that stuff. I'm not the biggest fan of the communication within Roll20, so we eventually switched to a hybrid approach using both Zoom and Roll20 at the same time. As far as their characters go, we've got Martin Kessler as a half-orc barbarian, Victor Rodriguez as a human paladin, Adam Rakoff as a human ranger, and Moose Matson is kind of a co-dungeon master slash like performance artist who steps in for extra dramatic impact as needed. I also threw an NPC into the group, a wood elf druid, just so they'd have a healer in the group. 2 of these players had never played D&D before, but also having this NPC in the group would allow me to introduce various adventure hooks and plot ingredients to kind of push things along and keep things moving. Because rather than start my players in a town gathering information and discovering all the adventure hooks through roleplay, I just threw them right into the module with the NPC Druid Drusilia having already informed them of all that they needed to know. I even went so far as to cook up this little dramatic video using the voice talents of Moose, as well as some music from Diablo 2 to set the mood ahead of time. And then between sessions, Moose and I also cooked up several more videos just to punch up the drama, but unfortunately I can't share them since I use music in the videos that would get this video pulled from YouTube. But in broad strokes, the Sunless Citadel sank into the ground centuries ago, and now it's the home of these warring factions of kobolds and goblins fighting over turf. And I tried my best to turn it into kind of like a Yojimbo or Fistful of Dollars scenario where the players were caught between these warring factions with the ability to try and manipulate both sides if they chose to. But the real hook is that a team of adventurers has recently gone missing inside the Sunless Citadel while looking for this evil druid, Bellock the Outcast. And Bellock's rumored to have discovered a Gulthias tree, which was something I'd never heard of, but has a really foul origin. A Gulthias tree is what happens when you put a stake through the heart of a vampire, and then that stake's allowed to take root in the ground and grow into this foul and unnatural thing with all sorts of unsavory abilities. And what my players didn't know until the end of the module was that the NPC that I'd invented and included in the group, she might have divided loyalties between Bellock and them. But I think I've talked enough at this point. It's time for me to introduce my players, so sit back and enjoy our review of the Sunless Citadel. We're just going to dive right in. So this first question is for both Adam and Martin. What was your general impression of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons prior to running your first module? And how have those feelings evolved now that you're level 3, have emerged victorious, got your first module in the rearview mirror? And Adam, in that I made you a promise years ago that I would eventually get you into D&D. I'm going to let you go first. What did Sunless Citadel as an introductory module for a new player?
So I had very little expectation as to what this was all about. I knew next to nothing about the game, how it was played. I just sort of knew the idea behind it. So I thought it was a blast. I was totally hooked within the first few minutes of playing. And by the time we had our first encounter with some bad guys, it was the time we went into a small room with some skeletons that were surrounding us, and they all came to life. I was in it. I felt it. I was tense. I felt like I was going into battle, and that was it. I was ready. I was excited to continue, and yeah.
In comparison to how you'd seen it played on certain shows and movies, how did our style kind of match up with those preconceived notions?
It didn't really. I feel like probably the place that I most related to was the place that I probably saw it first portrayed was on Freaks and Geeks. And that was the final episode of the series where they took James Franco's character into the fold. The geeks took him in and they taught him how to play. And I kind of was imagining, oh, this will be like, I'll be playing for the first time and I'll be Carlos the dwarf. And but just for the few minutes that you see them playing, I don't think that did the game justice at all. It really didn't get into the idea of rolling the dice to see how you attack and see how much damage you take. I don't think there's been a really good film or television depiction of the actual gaming experience in terms of like mainstream
Mazes and Monsters, man.
Well, which I still have not seen. I'm looking forward to watching that. I have the link that you sent me, the YouTube link, so I will check that out. But that's not officially Dungeons and Dragons. That's a fictional RPG. So this was though just an incredible experience for me. I really had a blast. And after the first 2 hours that we played about a month ago now, I guess it was a little 5 weeks ago, I just couldn't wait to play again. I think I probably would have been right there with you, James, in your room, in your dorm room growing up, playing with you every day if we had known each other way back when.
Back in the early 90s, maybe. Yeah. All right, well, Mr. Kessler, you are a gamer, like you play Dark Souls and Bloodborne and things like that. So the same question as I gave to Adam, but it's a little different in that you come at it from a different angle. So what was your preconceived notion of what Dungeons and Dragons and 5th edition might be like? And then what were your impressions having now played? I guess we've done 4 sessions. How many sessions have we done?
I think 4 now.
Yeah.
Not counting character setup and things like that. I'm sort of in a similar boat where I had a vague idea of what it was. I knew there were dice. I knew there was sort of this, I don't know, almost acting aspect to it, but I had a very vague idea of what it was. I didn't know there were different editions or really how to play it all. And just getting into it, I've been having so much fun. I like how it's a blend of both luck with the dice rolling and also strategic. It's coordinating attacks with your allies, trying to figure out what's the best strategy, where even if you get a bad roll and you don't actually get a hit, maybe what's the best position to be in, what's the best way to coordinate with your allies, and maybe when can you count on somebody to heal you, or when to use an item. I love all that, where it's not just like a raw strategy game, which can be fun too, but I think it's that blending of that mixed with the group dynamics, a lot of fun. And it's sort of cool how each player has their own character who has maybe a different focus or different skill set, and it's kind of fun to see how you can play off each other. Or my character, he's beefier, so it's fun to kind of send him in front or send him right into the thick of things and know that maybe he's going to get long ranged backup. And I'm really, really just enjoying it, and all the strange creatures that have shown up and all the twists and turns and that feeling of the encounters getting more and more difficult. I love those sorts of challenges coming off of games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne, where you kind of feel the tension ramping up and it forces you to understand the game in a deeper way and be a little bit more clever with your strategies, or you don't just rely on brute strength the whole time. Even though my character, I think he's all built around brute strength right now.
Yeah, when we made your character, I was like, he's not going to have a lot of options, but what he's good at, he'll be really good at. You're like, all right, that sounds good.
He's what do we call him? He's a good meat wall.
Yeah, absolutely.
I sort of like to think
damage sponge.
Like the Drax, the destroyer of the group, where quick to rage, quick to violence, maybe loyal and dependable. So that's kind of what I'm going for with the character.
Behold. All right, well, Victor, as a really experienced gamer in a variety of tabletop RPGs, as well as someone who's spent a lot of time working in the video game industry, at this point, I mean, you've been playing D&D, I think, off and on for about 40 years. So what is it that sets Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition apart? How well do you think the system has aged over the years? And if you've, I wonder, have you tried any other introductory modules in 5th edition? Because I think like the big one people try is Lost Mines of Fendelver in the 5th edition starter set. So just what are your thoughts on where 5th edition D&D stands right now?
Well, I think they did a fantastic job with the rules in sort of balancing out the character classes, which hadn't really been done till 4th edition. But yeah, I feel like the 5th edition is a really good pared down version of the early editions that really set this, sort of hobby on fire, and really keyed up people's imaginations. And it's really, I think they make the most of it while fixing the problems of the early editions. That was probably the mission statement at Wizards of the Coast. And I did play 4th edition too. It's vastly different from that. And I feel like 4th edition tried to emulate the video games that were sort of supplanting it in the marketplace. 5th edition is just proudly tabletop game. I think they did a fantastic job with it. I can't find a single thing wrong with it, only improvements.
Yeah, I think the only problem that I've heard people talk about with 5th edition is how, like with a lot of tabletop RPGs, how the atmosphere gets very thin as you get into high levels. However, as somebody who loves myths with like godlike entities and I like high fantasy, I'm determined to find a way for our campaign to sidestep the issues of the atmosphere getting thin at the high levels and making it very dramatic. But speaking of drama, let's talk about the great Moose Matson, who has been eerily quiet so far. But for people that don't know, Moose has been kind of my co-DM or co-conspirator. He helps me make all these introductory videos, just giving these modules a little bit of acting flair that I cannot do on my own. It's a level of performance I can never match. So Moose, as somebody who enjoys performing and who knows a lot about RPGs, but is not specifically playing a character, now that you've watched us in action for a few sessions, do you think we're striking the right balance between role play and like hack and slash and problem solving? Or just what advice would you have as an outside observer who's also contributing creatively?
It's interesting. There's a lot of times where you're watching people play like online, and there's some people that really get into the performance aspect of it, and some people that sort of play by the numbers. My character does this. We're sort of in between there, and I think we're actually going a little bit more into the performance, little by little as we're playing. So I'm looking forward to seeing the progression to the point where people start speaking dramatically when they're doing something.
Victor has done a bit of that. Victor, who's the most experienced
Yes.
of us, is not shy about expressing his theatrical side. I get very self-conscious. I'm much more of the old school, like, oh, so-and-so says this, or so-and-so does this, as opposed to actually going into first person mode.
Yeah, it's funny because if I don't know what I'm going to say, I might be, I don't know what to say. I don't know. But if I have the lines that you fed me ahead, I'm all dramatic and ready to go.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I've been really enjoying taking what's written in Tales from the Yawning Portal and then supplementing it with some of my own and kind of seeing, does my stuff like kind of, am I getting vomited out of the other material? Are they blending together, or can they not really tell the difference? I feel like I'm succeeding if they seem to blend together harmoniously, because I'm trying to inject as much drama as possible, because these old school modules are giant, but I'm trying to embrace this philosophy of all killer, no filler. And I'm not a big fan of trash. I'm not a big fan of random encounters. I feel like everything should serve a dramatic purpose. And so I'm trying to do everything I can to make it my own, but at the same time, still remain true to the Sunless Citadel. Well, I guess, Victor, I'll bounce back to you. What do you think of the idea of episodic adventures as opposed to one campaign that has a single story from beginning to end? Because my plan right now is basically to run y'all through each and every single adventure in Tales from the Yawning Portal. And that's going to be more episodic in nature, like stories like by Robert E. Howard. But in your experience, what are the pros and cons of episodic versus campaign?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was trying to think while you're asking me that question if I've ever been part of a continuing campaign that broke the storyline up into different modules, different adventures, and I don't think I have. Like, I think every other game that I've played has been a single storyline through from start to finish, with a single goal in mind. Maybe things sort of, we deviate from the path and come back, that sort of stuff. But it's basically building up to one conclusion. And I love the Robert Howard approach. I think that's been awesome so far, because you get, instead of one climax, you get 10 or 11.
That's what she said. Oh. Well, Adam, as you're brand new to, I mean, you don't play video games, or at least you haven't in a long time, and you're brand new to this. What would you say to people out there who have always thought about playing D&D, but are curious, but don't know how to get into it? Like, what would you recommend to someone who's totally unconverted, but at the same time has been curious for decades and never had their shot?
Well, and that's exactly me, because I did play games like Magic the Gathering back in the early 90s, and I was totally into that. I just never knew anyone that played D&D, so I never really had somebody like you to guide me through the process. And I think that's the key to successfully going down the D&D rabbit holes. You need
I think it's the first edition player's handbook that was like, if you want to learn to play, first step, find a group that's already playing. It's like, that's not helpful.
Exactly. You need somebody to be your guide and to basically teach you by playing. I've tried reading some of the materials, and they definitely reinforce what I've learned through playing, but really playing is the only way to learn. And I think that's really the only way to approach this, is find some people, or yes, any group could get together and one person could be designated the DM, and they could learn everything they have to learn. But I really do think you need someone a little seasoned, somebody that's done it before, to be able to take the party on a proper campaign or quest and make it exciting, make it feel like you're telling a story. Otherwise, I think it's too much of, and we've had our fair share of figuring it out as we go along.
Yeah, I've been learning 5th edition
Yeah.
right alongside y'all. I played 1st and 2nd edition from like the early mid 80s up through like the early mid 2000s. Took a long break. Then talking to Victor on podcasts, he would always bring up role playing games, and I kept getting the itch. Finally, I was like, fuck it. All these celebrities are playing it, and like there's a movie coming out, and there's like this giant game, Baldur's Gate 3. Like I'm getting back into this shit. And the best way for me to learn 5th edition has been to run an introductory module for levels 1 to 3, where any sort of game mechanic that might exist, we're going to encounter it and learn as we go.
Yeah, but just to go back, I have always wanted to play. I've always wanted to try it. It's always been one of those things that I'm like, well, when is this ever going to happen? And as you get older, it feels less and less likely that you're going to have a group of friends who will want to get together. So I greatly appreciate that you took on this challenge of, especially with me and Martin bringing us in, the two noobs, and getting us hooked.
It definitely helps to have that guidance, because it can seem a little bit intimidating at first when you see like, what does that number mean? What's a dexterity saving throw?
Right.
And but by the time you get into it and play through it and face certain challenges, you almost know right away. You have to maybe double check one or two things, but it gets a lot easier the more you play. It seems like it's just something you kind of need a little bit of guidance, and then you get a handle on through.
Yeah, I always try to tell people to play D&D, all you have to be able to do is be able to answer the question, what do you want to do? And the DM can walk you through the rest. If you can answer that question, what do you want to do? And explain what you want to do or say, then the DM can say, okay, well, you need to roll this, you need to roll that. But it's like, to be a player, you can know nothing or everything, and it won't necessarily make you like a better or worse player. It just is all about how you play. And so, Martin, as someone who's played a ton of video games, what would you say are the advantages of tabletop RPGs compared to playing video games? And what would you say are the disadvantages?
Well, I think one of the advantages for sure is just the group dynamic. It's totally different. Even when you're playing a multiplayer game, it can't really compare to this. There's something social about it that's a lot of fun. I'd say if there's one disadvantage, it might be just the pacing. It's hard to kind of match the pace of a video game, especially once you dive in. And I can see, if you really get into the mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons, how it could take you multiple sessions of hours to get through a relatively small portion, part of a dungeon. I can
being
see
able to roll the dice in the flesh does speed things up, but when everybody's like typing out elaborate equations, it's like it does slow things down. Yeah, I miss rolling dice in the flesh, but we will make that happen sooner or later. Well, Moose, I guess before we move into our spoiler section, any kind of final takeaways about just what you perceive or what you saw as the adventure of the Sunless Citadel and the role you played? I guess you got to play Grenell, and you got to play Drusilla, a character that I invented. You got to play Bellock, the outcast. You got to play, what was the name of the kobold queen? Yuzdrael, but you got to play all these different characters. So just what are your overall impressions, your spoiler-free impressions of the Sunless Citadel as an adventure?
Well, it was pretty fun. Again, I'm mostly only observing. However, I get those special little bits of information ahead of time. So
you knew about the betrayal that I
surprised the characters. Yeah, when I read that, I was like, ooh, I can't wait to watch you guys.
And that's not a spoiler, because I made that character up. Because as a 3-person party, I was worried about y'all being underpowered. So I was like, they need a healer. I can work her into the story and connect her to Bellock the Outcast. What the connection might be will change depending upon where they are when they get there. But by the time they got there, they'd already become 3rd level. I was like, all right, we need to make this more challenging. So we wrote up the betrayal.
Very nice.
Can you do the bear transformation scene for us, for people who did not get to experience it in real time? Because we didn't get to see what your face looked like when you're making the sounds. We only got to hear it.
Oh, I had my face covered with a blanket half the time to sort of muffle it. Oh, let's see. Do I have anything?
You can use the wrong real shirt.
Yeah. That's Stormtrooper helmet.
Let's see. That's it.
And I have brought you 3 very worthy new sacrifices for the tree.
that was fucking
busy.
magical. Yeah. All right. Well, now this is the last warning. If you are a potential player who's considering going through the Sunless Citadel, either the 3rd edition or 5th edition that you find in Tales from the Yawning Portal, this is your last spoiler warning. And so this is moving forward, either for people who are planning on DMing it and or people who just don't care about spoilers. So let's get into just some highlights. I'll be really interested in hearing what y'all thought were both the highs and the lows of the dungeon, because I mixed in and changed some of the encounters. I added some characters of my own. And so, Victor, let's start with you. Where did the module drag and where did it start really humming?
Well, I don't think it dragged at all. I really liked the opening encounter because it was, hey, the first time we're trying out our characters, so that was thrilling. It was a very simple encounter. I loved the encounter with the baby dragon, where you started by describing, hey, there's frost on the walls, and I was just like, oh boy, here we go. And I loved how you described that it was already forming a treasure hoard of junk that was in.
I would love to be able to claim credit for that. That comes straight from the module. Yeah.
That was great, and obviously the final scenario was every bit as team building as you think it might be. It was really close to destroying us, and that made it super exciting. And we had to rely on each other. I think it brought out all the sort of the team social aspects of the game. So I think those are my 3 favorite encounters.
What about you, Mr. Kessler? Highs and lows of the Sunless Citadel.
I don't think there were any lows. It was a blast the whole way through. There was one unexpected highlight when a certain monster appeared that I recognized.
That's one of my favorite highlights.
Any kind of prompting.
Yeah, because that's actually a change. Initially in there, it's just a bunch of goblins. And my attitude is, if you've already fought goblins in the previous couple rooms, another room full of goblins is not necessarily the best use of your time. I was like, all right, well, what if there's like a trap or like a menagerie where they're bringing in exotic creatures to help trap people? It's like, oh, well, cockatrice, it turns you to stone for a day, but it's not permanent. And I flashed the picture on the screen with the Shift Z, and you go, oh, a cockatrice with like a very Czech accent. I was like, what the fuck? And that floored me when you didn't miss a beat before identifying it.
It's like, oh, a Cocker Spaniel.
Yeah, exactly.
It caught me off guard. Another big highlight for me was also the one-on-one combat with all the goblins making the square and getting pushed around and seeing how that dynamic played out. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I was hoping for the encounter to be a little closer. You beat the snot out of him, but yeah, I've been reading all these Joe Abercrombie books, and in there up north, all the Vikings, or basically the equivalent of Vikings, are always forming a square, and you get some allies on both sides, and then you fight it out. And I was like, oh, what? Since he's a barbarian, forming a square is as natural as the turning of the earth, and also the fact that he would know about your career as a pit fighter and so on and so forth. I was like, I want to start trying to sprinkle individual character beats into different modules. And maybe not everybody gets a really great turn every module, but over the course of a campaign, everybody should get those solo hero beats. So it's like baseball. Sometimes you're in the field, sometimes you're at bat. And so, yeah, that was a lot of fun watching you navigate that scenario.
That was a great character moment, beat, challenge. And I also just like the environmental challenge of having, oh, we're outnumbered. How do we manage this situation? And how do I maybe stay away from these walls, which could grab onto me if I get too close, or anything like that could throw a wrench in just the basic mechanics of the combat. It's fun. It makes it more narrative based.
But also, hobgoblins do double damage if they are within 5 feet of an ally. And so I kept trying to push you nearer his allies so he would double his damage, but it never ended up working out. I kept missing. Well, Adam, what about you? Highs and lows of the Sunless Citadel?
No lows. I enjoyed every moment. I actually liked again, I'm not a gamer. I mean, I used to play games back in the day, but I don't play them anymore really. But for me, I love the pacing. I like that it takes its time. It feels more like you're on a real adventure or quest, that there are going to be down moments. It's not all just killing every second of every moment of the game. And I kind of like that. You get some time, that it actually makes the moments of battle much more rewarding when you have build up towards those moments. But for me, the high has to be, as I mentioned earlier, on the very first night, my first big encounter when we walked into that room and there were, I think, 5 sarcophagi.
Yeah, and you kept fucking with that little altar.
Yeah, exactly. And it woke them. And we thought it was an empty room. I honestly just wanted to explore the room to see if there was anything interesting, any clues, anything that we needed to pick up. And somehow we awakened the skeletons, and I had this image in my head of,
and
like,
if memory
Avengers.
serves, you found a trap right before
Yeah.
entering, like a big scythe that was gonna like cut you in two. So it almost
Yes.
made it feel like, oh, the danger's over. I've survived
like,
the trap.
we got past the trap for this room, so now we could just explore, see what's in here. Is there anything we need? But yeah, when we were sort of all standing in the middle of the room, and there were, I think, 3 skeletons emerging on top of us and 2 below us, and we were in our first battle, basically. I mean, we
I was
had
revealing them because they're hidden in a lair, so
Yeah.
I had to turn them on one at a time. So I turned one on, you go, oh, a skeleton. There's like 2. Y'all were kind of counting them as I was revealing them, like 3, 4 skeletons, 5 skeletons.
and as I mentioned, I kind of had this image of us all back to back, like the Avengers in the original Avengers movie, all getting ready for battle. Like, this is it, guys. Time to go to battle. And it was our first sort of test, even though they weren't very, they didn't produce a lot of damage. We were still being tested in a way. We were trying to figure out how are we going to handle this situation. So
you knew that Meepo was going to save the day.
yeah, Meepo. Oh, we didn't even bring up our friend
I
Meepo.
love Meepo.
Yeah.
No matter how many tabletop RPGs you play, you will never forget Meepo's name the rest of your life, just because you remember the NPCs from your early sessions very vividly. When you're 20th level and I've got like a path of destruction like behind you, you'll still think back to this little kobold who joined you on your first adventure, who sadly didn't make it past that encounter with the white dragon. Well, Moose, you had an interesting vantage point where on the last night you were at work, but listening on Skype, and you were reacting in real time and acting out how the characters would respond in combat. And for me, one of my favorite highlights was when, I can't remember which villain was getting killed, but you responded by throwing a soft drink in your face and go, ah, into the camera.
Oh, thank goodness I was healed.
Yeah, well.
All right, I see my comrades in trouble, so I'm going to get right in there on Bellock.
Like the legs of the druid are there, and Edwin's behind the legs, and he just looks over with shock on his face.
But for you, as you were listening in on all this mayhem, any highs and lows from the Sunless Citadel for you?
Oh, let's see, highs and lows.
I think you were there for 3 of the 4 sessions.
There for 3 of the 4. You guys banded against me on the last session, so I had to say, work the hell with work. I've got something better to do. So I worked while I was listening to you guys.
You found a way.
Listening, halftime watching.
Yeah.
But highs and lows. What were the highs? Well, the highs, I know the highs for me were doing like the voices for Grenell, and I wanted to do a little bit of a little Meepo. But no, I think the funnest thing for me was knowing that Martin and Adam hadn't played D&D before, and having that experience of those battles, especially those first ones, where you're not sure how your character is going to work against them, or what kind of damage is going to come back your way, and but you as a DM, it didn't make it too difficult for them in the beginning.
Yeah, I definitely tried to ease him into the baby into the pool, but I was like, by the end of this, because I struggled at being quote unquote new to 5th edition or new to D&D, or getting back into it after all these years, finding the proper balance where if it's too easy, it's boring. And if it's too hard, they get frustrated. So what is the right balance? And there's all different ways to try and figure that out. But I was getting frustrated that for me, the 2nd and 3rd session were too easy from my point of view. If y'all aren't getting the thrill, then you're not getting the full experience. And in order to get the thrill, there has to be the real chance that you're going to go down in flames. Otherwise, you're just, you're just killing time. And I don't, once again, all killer, no filler. And I don't want any session ever to feel like filler.
Well, thankfully, you weren't 20 minutes into the game and said, well, we're going to have to roll up some new characters because you're all dead.
Yeah, I mean, that will come, because I do plan on running some Call of Cthulhu investigations down the road where death and insanity are almost certain in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah.
But for me, some of the highlights were when things happen that I didn't anticipate. like Adam, there's a bit where you're in the room with the cockatrices. And
Yeah.
you notice on the map a little spread eagle rat on a table. You're like, what is that thing? I was like, what is that thing? And I look in the description, and sure enough, there's a description in there of a rat that's been like vivisected and experimented on. I was like, whoa, Adam just helped me discover a part of the module. Even though I'd read it through like a couple of times, like you're making me see this room in a different way. And it kind of opens up the idea that this is like a room for mad scientists doing evil, dark things and so on and so forth.
Yeah, but that's one of the things I like about the Roll20 app is it gives us that visual component that we can all share and experience. So obviously, if we were doing this in the old school method where it's all theater of the mind, I would not have been able to ask that question. So it would have been entirely up to you to describe all of those things. But
yeah. I mean, my problem is with theater of the mind is that every module becomes the same. I'm like, oh, you're in a long hallway, and at the end of that long hallway is a big scary monster. And it's like after like 5 or 6 sessions, like,
yeah,
oh, okay, we're doing this again. And so I fall into like these patterns. And so having a labyrinth forces me out of that repetition.
Right. But I love the graphical representation of the dungeon. It really, to me, it gives it a real feel, and you can see how far you are from the potential enemies. And I love that you can get out like essentially a ruler to see how many feet away you are. All of those elements I never anticipated being part of the game, but I really found that the Roll20 interface enhanced the experience.
Well, Victor, in terms of highlights, for me, one of the big highlights was the fact that whether you were as intentional or not, you seduced me or wooed me back into this world. How many people in your lengthy role-playing game career have you successfully brought back into the fold? Because there are a lot of lapsed players out there. Like that's what Joe Manganiello talks about in his videos about how he was away for 20 years. And when he started again, suddenly like Vince Vaughn was like, I used to play D&D. And suddenly like David Benioff and like DB Weiss were like, we used to play. And so suddenly all these celebrities started playing Dungeons and Dragons again.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't think it's been many, a handful, because most of my continuing friends already are gamers. And people that I meet at work, like generally when back when I was in the corporate sector, like I would only work at a place for 2 or 3 years on the average. So it wasn't really long enough of a time to, forge such a good friendship where it's like, hey, you want to stay after work and play D&D for six hours. People want to go home, but yeah, there have been a few, and I have to say I was one of those people too. My friend Andy ran a 4th edition D&D game after work, and because we were friends and we were hanging out at lunch and stuff like that, I was like, sure, I'll sacrifice one night a week and check this out, and it was great. Like it was nice, and that would have been after a long absence for me of playing D&D. So, there you go.
Now, what other tabletop RPGs are you currently up to speed with in terms of like the most recent edition? I know you were playing one that had like a contemporary settings, almost that felt like New Mutants.
Oh yeah, my friend Connor just ran us through a long campaign called Masks, which is it's basically exactly a New Mutants type setting, kids in high school, except we have superpowers, and obviously there's super villains in the city as well, and we form a super group and deal with those threats. The last game I ran for that group was the first part of Call of Cthulhu Masks of Nyarlathotep.
A+ on the pronunciation.
Yeah.
we covered on Wrong Reel. I forget the number, but it was the one where we just totally
all the H.P. Lovecraft adaptations.
Yeah, Lovecraft, yeah. And it's a fantastic module, but I had only ever read it before. I had never run it or played in it. So it was discovery for me too. And right now I've got friends and we're playing a game called Changeling the Lost, where we are sort of half mad survivors from the fairy realm that make our way back to Earth. And it's an urban fantasy game, but we have like slight magical powers.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Kessler, getting back to you in terms of like judging Sunless Citadel from an objective standpoint, any sections that felt too confusing, too easy, too hard? Because I'm always seeking that balance and blend of traps, puzzles, role playing, and combat. But the reality is, I will always try to run a fast-paced, combat-oriented game because that's just my nature. But in terms of like what the variety of experiences this module offers, how do you think the overall blend felt?
It felt like a really good sampling, I think. I was always curious what we might have been missing out on. Hey, what could have been in that door that we didn't go down? You know, that always kind of crosses your mind. I know when I play video games, sometimes I'll go back and just
I do full clear.
sweep through an area. So that
I go through
definitely crossed my mind.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you had any surprises for us that, I don't know if that would spoil anything, but if there was anything you had planned that we just didn't run into.
When you were level 1, there was a room with a shadow that would have led you to a mother rat. All those rats that kept coming out every time y'all were making noise. There was a giant bloated mother rat, like something out of like the James Herbert novel, The Rats. But in there was going to be the corpse of one of the 4 adventurers that you were looking for. And so that's how you would know. Oh, because remember, like, you saw at one point footsteps, but then you saw that there were fewer footsteps when you were going into the goblin area. Like, ooh, where did he go down? Well, he went down fighting the goblin mother. But once you got past first level, that whole wing would have become trivial. Yeah, every time you level up, it's time to move on to bigger and bolder challenges because it opens the door to increasingly exotic challenges.
You know, that's always interesting as a DM when you're going through an adventure, you're planning it out, and you're like, "Ooh, when they go into this area, okay, this will happen. Let me figure out how to use this guy," and they never even go into that section. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's not. You're like, well, that would have been really cool if you guys would have fought that guy.
Most DMs have the temptation of, do I railroad them toward the coolest stuff in the module? Because if I'm writing something on my own, which is incredibly time consuming, I'm just only going to write the best bits, and I'm not going to waste time on things that might get skipped. So it's going to be super railroaded, but somebody else has already done all the hard work. I might gently prod you in certain directions with like certain hints. Also, because with a limited amount of time, I want to make sure that you are focusing on the most essential ingredients. But yeah, I guess there is something to be said for just a module where there's no boss, where you just explore and do a full clear and just find every trap, every piece of treasure, run it into the ground. But I see y'all probably explored about 60% of what the module had to offer. And now that you've cleared it, I can just show you the pages. I'm like, yeah, this is what you missed. This is what you didn't see. But there were no major items. There's one piece of treasure that I took out because I thought it was overpowered for y'all's level. It's a sword called Shatterspike, which is a +1 longsword. Problem was, it was written in a really vague way where anytime it strikes an object, it has an opportunity to destroy it. And the way it's supposed to be used is Sir Bradford in the final combat is supposed to be using it to disarm people, which is cool as something for y'all to face. But then it's like moving forward, one player in the party is going to get that sword. So they're always going to be smacking locks or breaking doors or doing whatever. And it completely unbalances the game. And once you start fighting monsters that have magical weapons, then it all would kind of go back to normal. But the mechanic was written in a really vague way. And all the chat rooms about how to handle Shatterspike, nobody really arrived at any satisfactory answers. So I was like, you know what, fuck it. They'll all find magical weapons on Module 2, The Forge of Fury. So assuming y'all are so fortunate to survive that long. Well, as we start to bring things in for a safe landing, I'll just open the floor to just open conversation. Anybody have any notes or thoughts or takeaways or ideas about 5th edition, Sunless Citadel, working as a group, etc.? Now it's entirely up to y'all.
Well, I went through 2 adventures in 5th edition before this one, and I ran the first one. That was just when 5th edition first came out. I ran it for my virtual group, and just to see how the mechanics worked, and we were sort of learning as we went. That was something I made up. And then the second game was something my friend Mike made up. So this is the first published module that I've been through in 5th edition. And I thought it was great. I thought it was just furthering the point of what you said earlier, it was kind of a good story as well as being a good dungeon crawl scenario where we're, literally underground, exploring, doing typical D&D stuff. And there was a boss and a story and engaging to, find the missing rings or the missing bodies of the noble family. Like, I thought that was more than a typical motivation for exploring and looting monsters. So
yeah, I like having multiple stories overlapping where you can kind of pick, we're working on this a little bit, now we're working on this a little bit. So like befriending the kobolds and rescuing the dragon, that's a little mini story. Or how are you going to navigate this political riddle that I invented for the goblins and hobgoblins? Or what are you going to do about these? Like the missing adventurers is a through line through the whole thing, but there are little subplots and side plots along the way.
Exactly. And, also you asked earlier, like what, that I've been, gaming for quite a while. And the answer to what keeps it fresh is finding a good group. And it's something that after you've done a lot of tabletop playing, immediately. And I knew immediately with this group that it was going to be fun. So, you have just the right sensibility for GMing, and you guys have great sensibilities for playing. So I was excited immediately.
Nice. Well, as long as y'all keep showing up, I'll keep running these fuckers because I'm having a blast. And I might even start doing 2 campaigns at the same time if I can. Well, I've got the starter kit for Call of Cthulhu. I'm determined. I feel like since we're all movie freaks, and that's how we all know each other, we're all giant movie fanatics. Call of Cthulhu feels inherently cinematic in terms of what happens to the characters, where it's low time commitment. You can bring in anybody. We could bring in Bill Scurry or whomever, and we could go through a scenario and then talk about the experiences. And it's almost like creating a little miniature horror movie as friends. And so I'm thinking that'll be a great fun way to bring in some people who aren't able to commit to a giant campaign, but might just want to hang out with us for 3 hours and get their head torn off by some Lovecraftian monstrosity.
Well, I just want to say I agree with Victor that it's the group element. And I think that's the part that I wasn't expecting. Whether you play board games or video games, which I don't play a lot of, but any other type of gaming, you're usually playing against somebody. And I think that's the difference between this, is that we are a party where we are there to work together to solve the problem at hand. And for example, in our final battle, where I had 3 cure wounds and I was able to give 1 to each of us to help us get some of our points back. So I think that's what makes this more compelling, at least for me, is that we're working as a group, that we are in fact versions of these characters, and we really are trying to stay alive. There's a real risk that any one of us could die at any given moment, and we'll be out of this game, this adventure. So the stakes, as I think I've said it before, it's kind of like what James Caan says in the film The Gambler from 1974, that he gambles because he needs that juice. He needs the chance that he'll lose. And if he gambles all the easy way, if he takes all the easy bets where he knows he'll win, then there's no juice. So it's not exciting for him. We need that juice. And so thankfully, James, you brought that juice towards the end.
That'll be the name of the video. We need that juice.
That's right.
Kessler, Moose, any final words?
I feel like that's the difference between. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, all you. It's all you.
Okay. Yeah, I completely agree, and I think like that's one of the things that kind of separates this from just, I don't know, adults playing make believe. It's that feeling of stakes, that feeling of danger, and I think, like you said, the group dynamic adds so much to it. And I guess the real Dungeons and Dragons are the friends we made along the way. So yeah. That's kind of where I'm at.
All right, Moose, closing thoughts. I'll let you have the last word on this video.
I, Grendel, chief of the Bellock tribe, current chief, are still in your debt and offer you free passage through our lands at any time.
I love how you actually have updated his character to being the new chief since the previous chief was killed by Gort, played by Martin. So I don't think we're going to find a better ending than that. So we hope y'all have enjoyed this rant. And I guess this is as good a time as any. I'll just cut back to my closing remarks on the video. So, all right, I think that's all I have for now. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to doing another video of a similar nature once my group is finished running the Forge of Fury, which is the follow-up module to the Sunless Citadel. And they now have an additional member to their group, Dan Pullen, who's been brought in to play a human fighter. And Dan was nice enough to provide the music that you've been hearing scattered throughout the video. But I'm looking forward to seeing how people react to this, because obviously this is a new direction for the channel. I'm obviously going to continue covering film and television, but I thought that including the occasional video about gaming might be an interesting way just to provide a wider range of content on this channel. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. I'm particularly looking forward to hearing from gamers who have also taken a long time off, who are thinking about perhaps getting back into the game. But my Monday night gaming sessions are rapidly becoming a massive highlight of my week, and I don't have any plans on quitting anytime soon. But if you want to talk on Twitter, you can always hunt me down at Geeking Out. And please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and if you feel so inclined, share the video. But thanks so much for watching. We really appreciate it. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.